You have to unmute. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a question asked whether Ezra and Nehemiah, these books are learned in schools here in Israel, in the Jewish school track, whichever track.
Yeah.
If you're
You
aware.
can lock up for me today?
No.
Thanks.
What time do you want to be?
I'll be here till about 12 noon. Say it again one more time, Bruce. I'm sorry.
The
In
books
the school,
we're doing
something
now,
about the school.
Ezra and Nehemiah, which.
Oh, Ezra and Nehemiah.
And I'm wondering if when you grew up in schools in New York or even schools here in Israel, do they learn books like this in the Jewish schools?
Well, I can't answer that question without doing a little more research, but I can tell you in my school where I went, we got up till the end of Nevi'im Rishonim.
Wow.
And that was by the age of, I would say about bar mitzvah age. And then in high school, when we were already, let's say 13, 14, 15, then we started learning Nevi'im Achronim. But again, in the school that I went to, unless you specialized in Nevi'im Achronim, they only gave you like the basics. Like we didn't go through all of Yirmiyah Yeshaya or anything like that. We just got like a little bit of a sampling or a taste of it. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah,
that's the best I can. Okay. We're up to Hatshuva HaRevius, which is the fourth argument of the Rambam against the BeHaG. And this is on page Mem Beis in the Frankel edition of the Sefer HaMitzvot.
How many arguments are there in total?
There are 4 questions total. And the unique dimension of the fourth question is that the Rambam is accusing the BeHaG of multiplying the mitzvos d'Rabbanan in the most irrational way. The Rabbanan, when they instituted mitzvahs, we have the mitzvah of Chanukah and the mitzvah of Purim, but we have mitzvahs d'Rabbanan of Chesed to fulfill v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, and basically those are just simply nuances of how to fulfill those mitzvahs. What do I mean? Thank you so much.
Well,
Let's say, for example, Nicham Avelim. What is Nicham Avelim? How do you go about doing it?
doors open or closed?
Either way. So that it's irrelevant to me on one level as to what constitutes Nicham Avelim. But on a different level, on a much more profound level, I want to know what the Torah would ask of me in Nicham Avelim. So, for example, I was a Met fan, if anybody knows what that means. So I'm going to come into the Avel, I'm going to sit down at the Shiva, and I'm going to console him and tell him that the Mets won last night's doubleheader. Is that Nicham Avelim? Or take, for example, Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. Well, on one level, just go ahead and visit the sick. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. On another level, I want to know exactly how to fulfill this mitzvah. For example, do I have to sit down next to the chola, or I just stand, say a few words, and fly the coop? Can I visit the chola multiple times during the same day? Can I visit the chola in the morning, or should I visit him in the afternoon? And it depends on what kind of machla, which kind of machlas. Or, for example, the mitzvah of simchas chasav v'kala. There's so many different dinim of how to fulfill these mitzvahs. Who is going to be authorized to define the mitzvah and its nuances and address all these different questions that go into the very specific details? And the answer is going to be the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan are authorized by the Torah to tell us how when are we fulfilling this mitzvah? The Torah doesn't tell us. And we saw this already in Tefillah. The Torah says that you should serve Hashem b'chol levavchem in Tefillah. Ezi avodah shebelev in Tefillah. Well, how do I do that? How many times a day do I have to daven? What nusach should I use? Who's obligated in the mitzvah of Tefillah and when? So all these nuances are going to be ironed out by the Chachamim. But the BeHaG does something very strange. And he decides to multiply the mitzvahs of Taryag by taking each one of these subcategories of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha and upgrading them to the status of a separate independent mitzvah. And you multiply the numbers.
But that doesn't mean he's going to take things off the list that others had on the list.
Absolutely. But why take off things off the list by counting, as we'll see, let's go through it. Shemana ba'alachos nicham avelim, bikur cholim, Kvuras Mesim, Halbashas Arumim. The BeHaG has 4 mitzvahs. So again, the fact that these are D'Rabbanan, that has come under the fire and the anger of the Rambam in the first 3 tshuvas. These are D'Rabbanans. But even if I grant you, says the Rambam, that I'm going to incorporate the D'Rabbanans like Chanukah and Purim, or Mea Brachos B'chol Yom, or Hallel, into Taryag, even if I grant you that, as we say in Gemara language, afilu im timtzaloma. But why do you take the mitzvah of chesed, of avas Yisrael, and multiply it into 4 mitzvahs? Okay, there are specifics of how to do nicham avelim, and how to do bikur cholim, how to bury the dead, how to give clothing to the naked, but they're all different manifestations of one single mitzvah. V'divrei harav b'tshuva azos. This is the commentary of the Ramban. You know, he gives out accolades and grades, and he decides, I'm going to give the Rambam a grade on this level of tshuva revius. Tmimim. You know what the word tmimim means? Perfect. Unblemished. I cannot defend the BeHaG. After all the work that the Ramban has been doing for pages upon pages to defend the Ramban, to defend the BeHaG, and we're almost walking out of here thinking that, you know what? The BeHaG is much better than the Rambam. But all of a sudden, the Ramban raises his hands in the air, conceding defeat. The divrei harav b'tshuva azos tmimim. And he says that divrei halachas alumim. Alumim means they defy our understanding. Alumim means they are concealed. They're beyond our grasp. Omar, and now he reiterates the Rambam's objection in the Tshuva Revius. Shemona al boshas ha'arum. Apparently, why did the BeHaG categorize clothing the naked as one of the Taryag mitzvahs? Shemotza b'Yeshayahu, because in the pasuk in Yeshaya it says ki tira arum, if you see a naked person, v'kisiso, and you are mandated to cover him. So since Yeshayahu Hanavi already went out of his way to specify clothing the naked, therefore it becomes a mitzvah in Taryag. Ki ulai choshav mitzvahs hamazon u mitzvahs hamalbush shtayim mizeh hakosuv b'kabol. He says the following. There's a mitzvah of mazon. What does mazon mean? Tzedakah, charity. The greatest charity that you could imagine is feeding the destitute, feeding the hungry. So why does halbashas harumim deserve the upgrade of being counted in Taryag when mazon Just providing the basic sustenance is not counted for an ani, right? Is not counted in Taryag. And the answer is Mizeh HaKosef b'Kabbalah. Kabbalah means Nach, Nevim Ksuvim, and we have Yeshaya Novi as part of Kabbalah. And Yeshaya Novi specifies that Kitira Aron v'Kisisa, separating as an independent category the obligation with regard to Albashas Arumim. It's interesting. It always occurred to me very odd. In my mind, it was always odd that amongst the brachos that Chazal require us to bless on a daily basis, there's Baruch Atah Hashem, Malbish Harumim. Malbish Harumim is one dimension of chesed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has bestowed so much chesed on us. And certain aspects of that chesed are specified and others are not. But no mention of mazon here, that God provides food for us. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Hazon Hamazinus Olam. No, there is no such bracha. Hamalbish Harumim. I don't know if you've ever heard of Rav Avigdor Miller. Does that name mean anything to you? So he wrote a book called Rejoice, O Youth. He wrote many, many books.
Yes.
And amongst his books, he has a book that's dedicated to manufacturing clothing. Could you imagine? Pages and pages on weaving and producing clothing. We say the bracha Malbish Harumim, and we thank Hashem for giving us clothing. Now, who pays attention to it? I don't want to go into detail, but there's a certain school, and I'm sure there are many others that fit that category. It happens to be a girls' institution. And if you don't have the latest coat that came out with, it probably costs about $2,000 in American money, then you're considered like the lower echelon. But the truth is that Malbush is much more fantastic and complicated than meets the eye. In the same book, he has, by the way, a study of Pokeach Ivrim, books about the miracles of the eye, for pages upon pages. Who even pays attention to it? You wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, and Fatika Maisa, that's the end of the story. The Imkain Hibi MS, Svara Nifsedes Shezek Kulo Nichlas Bechlal Masha Omar Yis'ala B'Torah. He says that if the BeHaG counts Malbish Harumim as one of the Taryag because Yeshayahu Navi mentions Kitira Orim V'Kisiso, well, let's go back to the Torah itself. The Torah itself tells us that we have to supply the poor person with all his needs, whatever his needs are. There may be food, there may be clothing, there may be a house, a roof over his head, there may be protection from the cold, there may be psychological support. All this comes under chesed. And not only that, Chazal tell us that it's not just to supply the poor person with his needs, but moreover, we have to bring him back to his original state of financial success. The man was used to driving, what should I say, a Rolls Royce, I don't know, here we'd say a Volvo, I don't know, they change every year, and he became poor, we have to buy him a Volvo. And that's derived from the pasuk De Machsaro Asher Yechsar Lo. He got used to riding a horse, buy him a horse. He got used to having runners run in front of him, like he was the king of who knows what country. De Machsaro Asher Yechsar Lo.
So,
Afilu sus lirkov, the Eved Rotz Lefana. Yeah.
do we ever act on that? Would we really, in limited resources, supply an inordinate amount to someone, get him a palace because that's what he's used to living in, and let all the other homeless people, we'll give them a tax.
So I think the answer to your question is that Stucca divides up into two categories. There's communal obligations and there's individual obligations. On an individual level, and this already you'll see in the Chafetz Chaim, he wrote a book about chesed. It's called Avas Chesed. It's the bottom word, the final word on chesed. Imagine an entire book on chesed. And in that book, he says that when it comes to individual tzedakah, meaning my personal obligation, I should divide and conquer. Like, let's say, for example, this guy over here could use 100. But if I give him 100, then I miss the opportunity of divvying up that 100 amongst 10 other poor people, giving them $10 each. Again, there are a lot of nuances of laws over here. Like, for example, you wouldn't break down $100 into pennies because a penny is not chashuv, but $10, again, back in the day, let's say it was worth something. And the Chafetz Chaim paskins that take the $100, divide it into 10, and on each particular gift that you give, you get schar for pasach tiftach es yodecha, the pasuk, and therefore you'll get 10 mitzvahs with $100 rather than one mitzvah. Very complicated question. I mean, intuitively, I could argue, give this ani $100. Take him off the streets. You're going to give him $10? What's he going to do with $10? Probably buy whiskey. But anyway, that's a different question. But then there's something called communal tzedakah, which is called a chovas tzibur, if you're familiar with that language. And in tzedakah, there's a whole different set of laws in the dimension of communal tzedakah. Like, for example, we find that in communal tzedakah, there's an obligation to guarantee that everyone has 4 cups of wine for the Seder and matzah that's kosher for the mitzvah of matzah. Now, that could involve a tremendous amount of fundraising. So that Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, they give their check. That's not going to cover, what we call mos chitin for everyone in the community. So there's special dinim that apply to the community. Now,
but will we give the one fellow extra expensive wine in that case within the confines of the 4 cups? Because that's what he's used to drinking. And it means that everyone else is going to have to get grape juice.
Well, no, I think in that case, if he's used to drinking, a special kind of wine, and that doesn't come in the Demach Soro. Demach Soro has to do with the 3 basics. What are the 3 basics? Again, we can spend hours on this. Like, for example, you heard of Ma'aser Ksofim. So there are 1,001 questions about Ma'aser Ksofim. Where should I give my Ma'aser? How should I divvy up my 10%? But just to give you like the tip of the iceberg, but a basic law is that there are 3 tzedakos that are absolutely critical. And they are food, shelter, and clothing. Those are the 3. So, for example, if you're calculating where to divvy up your meiser, then you have to first calculate what your own expenses are. Then you calculate your income, which could be made up of many different factors. You rented out a house, or you have your Social Security money coming in, you have Yerusha, you have a million different ways that money is coming into your bank account. That's income. So what you do is you subtract your needs from your income. So let's say your needs come to 1,000, your income is 1,500, and you give 10% of the 500. You follow? You're subtracting your needs from your income. And hopefully, if you're in the black and not in the red, so your income is greater than your needs. What are your needs? I need money to go to the movies. I need money to go to an opera, to go to a baseball game. Shall I incorporate that into my basic needs? The answer is, again, every rule has its exception, but the general rule is no. You calculate your needs by shelter, food, and clothing. What kind of shelter? What kind of food? What kind of clothing? Like I said before, the girls who have to buy a coat that costs $2,000. Is that my basic need? All right, let's try to make a little progress because at some point we do want to finish the Ramban. He says the following. He says, Kulo nichnas b'chlal masha omar yis'ale b'torah dei machsara. The Torah says, provide the ani with dei machsara, that which he's lacking. Kolel, what's included in dei machsara? Hachesronos kulam, anything that he's missing, whether it be food, whether it be clothing. Why do you focus on clothing? Okay, so good. You found a pasuk in Yeshaya Navi. And for whatever reason, Yeshayahu Navi exhorts us, mandates us to clothe the naked. Okay, fine. But go back to the Torah itself. You're counting Taryag mitzvahs. Go back to the Av rather than the Tolda, to the archetype rather than its subcategories. The archetype says the Torah is Dei Machsaro, as I state. That's what it says in the Torah. And that means Kol HaChisronos, whatever he's lacking. So just because you found a pasuk in Yeshaya, therefore you're going to count the mitzvah of La'alboshas Harumim as one of the Taryag? Moshe Amru, I believe it's Gemara Ksubis, Afilu sus lirkovola, the Eved loretz lefana. V'chein afilu asio isha. Could you imagine what it would cost to marry off, let's say, a young man or a young woman who's destitute? You know, you're talking about major support. You're not just talking about buying them a wardrobe for the wedding and after the wedding. You're not just talking about supporting them. You know, a ksuba is 200 zuz, basic ksuba for a first marriage. So the Pnei Yeshua is famous about 250 years ago. He asked, why 200 zuz? And there are many answers to that question, but he says that 200 zuz is the amount that it would take you to put food on the table for 1 year. Oh, Baruch Hashem, how do you like that? Masechta Ksubos. Okay. You know, when the memory works, I get happy. Hakol kamosha kosav Rav Zatzal. Everything makes, all these arguments against the BeHaG make sense based on the logic of the Ramban. He counts Nichum Avelim, the BeHaG, as a separate mitzvah. He counts Bikur Cholim as a separate mitzvah. Omar, Shemona Osa Mitzvahs Nei Atzim Neishei Nidrashas B'Talmud. The Gemara in Bab Metzia derives from an extra word in the pasuk that you have to be Mavakir Cholim and Nichum Menachem Avelim. What does it say in the pasuk? It says, Asher Yelchu Ba. This is the road, the journey that you should walk on. Why does it have to say that? Zeh Bikur Cholim. Bikur Cholim means get out of your chair and go be Mavakir Cholim. I mean, I take this personally as a Mussar Shmuz to myself, honestly. Because one of the things I like about Efrat is that, like, you know, except for the OU, I don't have to leave Efrat, you know. Even to go from Dagan to where I am now in Rimon takes me under 15 minutes. I love that. That's why the Oreach, when he benches at the table of his host, he says in his blessing, Shehei nechasecha krovim le'ir. I know a Rosh Hashiva. He's a little bit older than me. He lives down in Miami, Florida. And anyone who marries into his family has to live within a radius of 2 miles. Otherwise, don't even enter the family. So that's great. And therefore, Bikur Cholim, you know, I have a relative somewhere in Yerushalayim. I don't want to go visit her. Asher Yelchu Ba. Bikur Cholim. V'sham Hikshu Hainu Gemilas Chasadim. And the Gemara lists Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, as a separate category in addition to Gemilas Chasodim. So Gemara asks, what's Manis Chadish for? What Chidush, what new addition have you added to my knowledge to Gemilas Chasodim by telling me there's a mitzvah Bikur Cholim? What I don't understand that Gemilas Chasodim, when we extend care and benevolence and feeling for another Jew, that it includes Bikur Cholim. Of course it includes Bikur Cholim. So what did you add to me? And the Gemara answers, Lo tzricha dafilu ben gilo. And ben gilo means that at that age, the disease could be very contagious. Now, this was the whole issue of Bikur Cholim during COVID. And the Torah is telling me a special chiddush, that above and beyond the normal Gemilas Chasodim, where a person doesn't even expose himself to danger at all, we have a special mitzvah Bikur Cholim that applies even if you're going to be exposing yourself to danger. And of course, the poskim are going to try to figure this out.
Doesn't that go against Pekuach Nefesh to expose
Correct.
yourself to that?
That's the issue here. Are you allowed to expose yourself to contagious diseases, Rahman al-Islam? So obviously you have to take every precaution that you can. But at the end of the day, this was Rabbi Levin, Zichron Levrach. You heard about him? Ish Tzaddik. There's a fellow named Simcha Raz who wrote books about him. And he tells you that people know Rabbi Levin as the famous person who visited, Asirei Tzion, those who were put into jail by the Brits, Yimach Shemam. British anti-Semitism goes back ages, way before German anti-Semitism. Anyway, but to get back on track, so Rabbi Levin used to visit Mitzoraim. Now, when I say Mitzoraim, I'm not talking about metaphysical Mitzoraim. I'm talking about lepers. And I can tell you how contagious it is. The Ramban writes not to ever take a coin into your mouth because you might contract leprosy. So this is the separate halacha that applies uniquely to Bikur Cholim. And the Gemara tells us in Masechta Nedarim that Bikur Cholim is a matter of Pikuach Nefesh. Now again, today we have hospitals. So that's a whole different story. So the big question about Bikur Cholim in a hospital is whether or not you just pass by and, commensurate with him, or you have to sit down and really talk to him. My father, may rest in peace, was a chaplain in a hospital called the Coney Island Hospital for about a half a century. And when I asked my father, Dad, do you get a salary for this? And the answer was yes. He's a municipal worker. It was a city hospital. So I said, Dad, do you get credit in Olam Haba for the mitzvah Bikur Cholim? And he said, yes. So I said, Dad, wait a minute. If you're getting paid for it, then that undermines the mitzvah. So he said, no, I sit down next to the cholim because technically in Bikur Cholim, you don't have to sit down. I sit down. Anyway. So
actually, a fraud may not have there's all kinds of lists in a fraud. I've never seen one that says these are the lists of people who might appreciate a visit. Right on the front.
All right. Bruce, I don't know, maybe the two of us will do this together. We'll open up an institution. My wife last night went to a fundraiser for an institution that reaches out to divorced women. Do you listen to this? Not to almanos and widows, but it's very specific. And apparently divorced women need certain specific cares and monies and whatever they need.
Why only the women? What about the men?
That's where you and I have to come up. So she took it upon herself, to help the divorced women. You and I have to take it upon ourselves to help the divorced men. I don't know. I don't want to accept the responsibility because it's neder gadol nodel elokei Yisrael. I say bli neder. But for sure, in Bikur Cholim, the only thing I would point out about Bikur Cholim is that, if you're creating a list for purposes of davening on behalf of the cholah, then I have no reservations about what you said. But if you're talking about actually visiting the cholah, so I don't know. I have my histaygiyot, my reservations, because I'm not sure. Again, there may be a million different considerations, but I'm not sure if, some anonymous faceless person that you've never met in your life is necessary. Again, if if he's a clown.
No, but that's not the reason to do it. In case there are people that you do know that are on the list, you don't know they're sick.
Correct. Maybe you don't know about them. Usually you do find out about it, through the grapevine. But maybe you won't
in the
find
hospital. I had a kidney stone a few months ago, and this has been my pattern every so many years. It's the same kind of Jews visit you in the hospital. They don't come from across the entire spectrum of the population, unfortunately. And of course,
And
I
these
don't
are
know.
the people you don't know. You've never
Right,
met.
I don't know. Right.
And let me ask you, as a patient, did it help you? Did it, console
Sure, they're
you?
bringing snacks. They ask, do I have a proper sitter? How am I doing? I think it's very helpful.
That's good to hear. In America, there's an organization called Bikur Cholim. So my mother-in-law, who passed away just a few months ago, was in Sloan Kettering. And my wife and I had to spend a lot of time in that neighborhood. So Bikur Cholim, we're talking about East New York. I don't know if you have any idea what a building in East New York goes for. And they dedicate the building, it's called the Friendship House, simply to people who need Bikur Cholim. We were there for 10 days.
I had the same thing in Lakewood. I went to visit my father in the Kimball Medical Center, and diagonal across was, I think, called the Weinberg House. I forget, maybe that was the name of it. And I spent like a week there. Unlimited food, beautiful room.
Unbelievable.
It was unbelievable.
How does it say in the pasuk, Miki Amcha Yisrael? I mean, I'm already almost crying because it was so moving to us what they did for us and for many others.
You don't read about it in the newspaper. They always talk about bad stories. And that's the stories they can put in the paper.
Right.
Publicize that.
Now we get on to Kvura. Keep in mind that the BeHaG counts Kvura, burying the dead, as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. And all the laws of Kvura are D'Rabbanan. V'chein darshu ba zu Kvura. Right, so we have a special ribui in the pasuk for Kvura. V'hikshu hainu gemilas chasadim. Once again, you gave me a general category called gemilas chasadim. Why do you have to specify Kvura? Is Kvura not gemilas chasadim? So again, the Gemara gives different approaches to this. Some say, well, chasadim is only with the live people and Kvura is with the dead. But the Gemara wants to know if there's a separate obligation in Kvura that goes beyond Gemilas Chasadim, meaning, like we said in Bikur Cholim.
Your initial question was, this is a subset of a D'Oraita mitzvah, and why is it counted again as a D'Oraita?
Right.
I mean, that's more the question here. I mean, that could mean every D'Oraita mitzvah has subsets, every single one.
So why is the BeHaG counting these as subsets? So first he made a lame attempt by saying, well, Malbish HaRumim is specified by Yishai. Then he argued against that. What about Dei Machsaro? Dei Machsaro is a general, all-inclusive obligation that's not limited to Malbish HaRumim. And now he's saying that, guess what? As far as Nichum Avelim is concerned, or Bikur Cholim are concerned, the Gemara argues in Bab Metzia that's all included under the category of Chesed, Milas Chasadim. So again, it's a subcategory. So the Gemara answers, no, it's not a subcategory. Bikur Cholim is a separate category. And as far as the generic Milas Chasadim is concerned, I would not have to visit him if there's even a chance that I might, through contagion, I might catch the disease. And in Bikur Cholim, as opposed to any other dimension of Chesed, there is an obligation. What's unique about Kvura that goes beyond Gemilas Chasadim? The Gemara says, "The afilu lizaken v'eno lefich voda." Now, I don't know if you've ever buried the dead. It's exhausting.
I'm a Kohen.
You're a Kohen, so it's not relevant to you. Well, it actually is relevant to you in 7 cases. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that Zvuras HaMes is like the basic kind of work. It's it's below the dignity, in quotation marks, of a certain zaken. Zaken means, he's a scholar and he walks around with a tie. No one else walks around with a tie. You know what I'm saying? I'm just joking with you, but I remember Rabbi Riskin, with his turned up hat. You've seen Rabbi Riskin with his hat, right? So tell a person like that, who's a zaken, that he should, has the phrase going in English, down in the dirt. I don't know, go down in the ditches and bury the dead. Yes. In all of Gemilas Chasodim, zaken v'eino lefi chvodo is potter. We exempt him because it's below his dignity, and human dignity is very central in Judaism.
So you mentioned earlier that your father was on a payroll. You'd think that these certain mitzvot, city, would actually pay a core group. Maybe they do, for all I know. Digging the grave, visiting the sick. And those people can find people to join them on some voluntary basis, but there would be set people paid by the community. So that for sure.
Absolutely.
But I don't think we have that. Isn't Chevra Kaddish all voluntary here?
I don't know. I know the Chevra Kaddish that I'm familiar with, whether it's in Beit Shemesh, whether it's in Yerushalayim, these are paid people.
Okay.
Yeah, paid people. In fact, it's very rare that you find, voluntary members of a Chevra Kaddish.
And Efrat, it's all volunteer.
Maybe Efrat is the small city, where people have a close relationship. But if, let's say, Chas v'sholom, I had to, bury the dead in Yerushalayim, then immediately I contact the Chevra Kadisha. And these are paid workers. In fact, you can ask me the following question: does a member of the Chevra Kadisha get schar in the world to come if he's a paid person? When you get money for a mitzvah, that undermines the mitzvah.
We know what they say.
In the case of Bikur Cholim, the sitting as opposed to
the laws. He's paid to study the laws about it. Then when he does it, that's the mitzvah.
Maybe they have a contract that says we're only paying you for studying the laws. I don't know. I never heard of such a thing, but maybe you're right. Uchuvas harav al zeh beikar hasheni tshuva okeres ikarim gdolim mesafes haros gvos. All right, I told you the Ramban is a poet. He's a liturgist. This is another example. He says that on a logical level, the objection of the Rambam to the BeHaG's counting each one of these subsets of chesed as separate mitzvahs in Taryag, those objections are oker. They can undermine a mountain that's so powerful. And he describes that in very poetic language. But he says that Avol Bal Halachos Hotzion LeMitzvos Ha'elu Mivalachta B'Drachav She Mitzvos Hasei Be'emes. 1 second. Yeah. See if I can do this. Okay. And he says that the pasuk says Valachta B'Drachav. Now, chesed is derived from the pasuk, classically, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. But now, says the Ramban, there's another dimension, another category of chesed, meaning that chesed fits under a different mitzvah in the Taryag, not just V'ahavta. And that's the mitzvah of Valachta B'Drachav, that we have to imitate the Almighty, imitation Yodeo. So he was Malbish Harumim, and he was Mevakar Cholim, and he buried the dead. We have to do the same. She mitzvah saseh be'emes, and that will be counted, even according to the Rambam in the Taryag. V'olechas b'drachav, and what does it mean to imitate God? V'alachta b'drachav. Is lahal b'sharumim, likvar mesim, l'nachem avelim, v'akar cholim. All of these are manifestations of the mitzvah of imitate God. V'alachta b'drachav. And we can go through each one of these, like for example, in Odom V'chava, it was Mal B'Sharumim. In Kfuras HaMes, it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu buried Moshe Rabbeinu. Nichem Avelim, God came to visit Avram Avinu after the loss. Just 1 second. That's Bikur Cholim. Nichem Avelim, Avram, HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to visit Yitzchak Avinu after the loss of Avram. So we are imitating God in each one of these 4 directions. Says the Ramban, that's not going to help us. The same objection against the BeHaG is going to pop up here under V'alachta b'drachav. Why? Mitzvah achasen. It's all one mitzvah. These are various manifestations or expressions of how to imitate God. There may be an infinite number of ways in which we can imitate the Almighty. I remember Rav Soloveitchik used to always say that Rabbi Akiva imitated the Almighty. What does that mean? So, now during the Sefer, we mourn and grieve over the loss of 24,000 students. But the Gemara says in Yevamos that after Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students, which is beyond comprehension, I think even in Theresienstadt, where the numbers were crazy, it didn't reach 24,000 a day, but anyway. In any event, so the Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva started from scratch. And he had 5 Talmidim, and he was able to restore the tradition of Torah. So Rav Soloveitchik used to always say that Rabbi Akiva fulfilled the mitzvah of halachta b'drachav, to imitate the Almighty. How so? Because the Medrash at the beginning of Bereshis quotes Rabbi Avo as saying that bara olamos v'hichrivan. We think that this is the only world that God created. But Rabbi Avo teaches otherwise. There were many experiments before this one. Now, I don't know why this experiment was successful. That's the honest truth.
Well,
But
we're not sure it is yet.
what?
Well, not jump to any conclusions.
Yeah, that's right. We don't know what's going to be tomorrow. And man is bringing himself on the abyss of self-destruction. In any event, so just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu would destroy a world when he realized it was not successful, but yet he would come back into the rink and start again and recreate a new world, so to Rabbi Akiva, who lost a world, recreated the world. So that's V'alachta b'drachav. But at the end of the day, it's only one.
It's a very strange idea. Where does that come from? I mean, it's based, there's archaeology to suggest such a thing and all kinds of other science, but where did they get that idea that there were worlds before this one? In what context is that being said?
I don't remember if Rabbi Avo has a pasuk from which he derives it, but Rav Soloveitchik used also to ask, in Midrashim, the Midrashim have to have a purpose. They have to have a message. That was his, basic premise. To him, that was one of the Yud Gimel precepts of the foundations of the Torah. There's no such thing as a Medrash that just tells us something metaphysical, which has no moral, ethical meaning for us. So he asked the question, why is it important that Rabbi Avo, I don't know how he derives it, has to teach us that there were worlds before this one that God destroyed? Who cares? I mean, do I know anything about creation? The Rav has another lecture, by the way, which he goes on for hours and hours, why the Torah tells us the story of creation, which is ex nihilo. We don't have a clue what that's all about. But the basic premise of Rav Soloveitchik is always the principle of morality. There's got to be a moral lesson inherent in any pasuk, in any mitzvah, in any medrash. So he said that we have to imitate God, who created worlds, destroyed them, and recreated them, and realize that sometimes things just don't go well. You're a Rosh Yeshiva for 20 years of a yeshiva. You've got hundreds of Talmidim, and then for whatever reason, it goes down the tubes. Go start over again. Go move to Efrat and try to start again. You follow my point? So that's what God does. He teaches us that It's unbelievable. There's a statement in Chazal which cannot be understood about Yosef HaTzadik. Just 1 second. No, not about Yosef. About David HaMelech. Sorry, I almost blew it. That David HaMelech sinned in order to teach us tshuva. Go figure that one out. I have a whole lecture on this, but be that as it may. What does it mean? So God destroys worlds in order to teach us that we have to recreate worlds even after they're destroyed. And only a Rabbi Akiva could achieve that level. Who can start from the beginning? You imagine the situation of a man who built up a business over the course of decades and decades, sweat and tears, and then it went down the tubes, and now start again? The Gemara says
the other message is don't create a world which God wants to destroy.
Yeah, but how do you know that? I mean, you're trying to teach Talmidim. You've got 24,000 Talmidim. That's a pretty impressive number. Who can say today that they have 24,000 Talmidim?
Well, I mean,
to this day, we don't know exactly what went wrong. I mean, the Gemara says,
so one could use that for an anti-nuclear policy or anything that don't tamper with things that can destroy.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, they say about Nobel. What was his first name? It was Alfred, I think. He was famous for. They used to call him the Dynamite King. He invented dynamite. And why did he create the Nobel Prize towards the end of his life? Do you know the story, Bruce?
Yeah, because they heard about someone's written on his grave.
Oh, okay, I heard it's more or less the same. I heard a version that he woke up one day, there was some sort of an explosion, I don't know what, and the obituary columns said that Nobel had died. He was still alive. And what did they call him? They called him the Dynamite King. So that his only contribution to mankind was the destruction through a dynamite. And that's when he decided to give money for the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
V'zemi Masha Amru b'Gemara Sota. What time is it? Amar Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina. My dichsiv. What does the pasuk mean? Achrei Hashem Elokeichem Telechu. Walk behind God. When you think about it, if you take it literally, how do we understand such a thing? And the Gemara goes on to say that God is like a fire. You can't travel in the direction of a fire. Ella, but rather it means imitation Deo. Ma Kodesh Baruch Hu Mal B'Sharumim, Afata Hal B'Sharumim. Ma Kodesh Baruch Hu B'Vaker Cholim, Afata B'Vaker Cholim. Ma Kodesh Baruch Hu Kover Mesim, Afata Tikvar Mesim. Ma Kodesh Baruch Hu Menachem Avelim, Afata Tenachem Avelim. Now notice that when the Gemara wants to define Rabbi Chama, imitatio Deo, it has 4 examples. Those are exactly the same 4 mitzvos which the BeHaG added to the Taryag. We can almost claim without a doubt that this statement in the Gemara in Sota, in the name of Rabbi Chama, was the source of the BeHaG. Again, I'm not telling you it justifies the BeHag's conclusion that we should count all these 4 as separate mitzvahs. But it can't be coincidental that when the Gemara wants to give 4 examples of halachta b'drachav to imitate God, it came up with the same 4 that the BeHaG incorporates into Taryag mitzvahs. Mikan hotzio samumanam k'mitzvah. Says the Ramban, I have no doubt that this was the source for the BeHaG to draw the conclusion that these 4 are categories of mitzvahs. Each one is a separate independent category with its own dinim and its own conditions and its own nuances. Barav Mona, the mitzvah chesli damos bo yispara. Okay, the Rambam has covered this already. Because the Rambam in mitzvah ches, number 8, has the mitzvah of halachta b'drachav to imitate God. And underneath that, you have 4 subcategories, as we said.
Could I call something deraita but not listed in the count?
Sure, absolutely.
So maybe that's what's going on here. He's saying that this.
That's the Rambam Shita. The Rambam Shita against the BeHaG is you count it in the Taryag because it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, even if it has many, many subcategories. many of
why
which are
would-
under Rabbanan.
I mean, what would the Rambam argue about that particular point?
He throws up his hands in the air. The Ramban doesn't know in this fourth argument against the BeHaG how to defend the BeHaG. And he gives accolades to the Rambam with very poetic language. And he says, this is the Rambam mitzvah sasei ches, behevi ein sham asher kodesh baruch hu, al shem maybe, al shem asher kodesh baruch hu rachum afatoi rirach. God is compassionate, you be compassionate. Omar v'kofel zos mitzvah loshen acher shenemar achrei Hashem telechu. You should follow in the ways of God, but literally in the walking of God. You know, walk behind God. Uba b'pirush in Yono, and what do we mean by walking behind God? Lidamos elov b'polav hatovim. We should imitate God's great actions of benevolence. V'imkein lama yisma al bal halachos. Okay, so the Rambam is not sure about the bal halachos, and the answer is hu tofas aloshan hashoni b'sefri b'mitzvah zos. Right, so the Sefer indicates that all of these aspects of bikur cholim, etc., are all dimensions of achrei Hashem elokechem telechu. So it's one mitzvah. Ubal halachos tofas lo aloshan hashoni b'gemara. But the Baal Halachos saw that the Gemara went out of its way to specify these four, meaning that these four should be counted as mitzvahs. Each and every one of them is an independent mitzvah. Why should that be? No answer. Vanira b'chol zeh, I figure out. Yeah. Vanira b'chol zeh, shekol elu. Okay, whatever it is here. Shekol elu gemilas chasodim b'chlal ve'aftal l'recha kamocha. So we should subcategorize all those four categories under the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael, of Avas l'reacha. B'chol shenisrabe b'gemilas chasodim b'zokim and l'fichvodo b'ben gilo. Ma'izeh mokom sheyisraba kol mitzvah achasi. Okay, fine. There are special categories in dinim that apply to each one of these subcategories. Like, for example, in the case of digging the grave, it applies even to a zaken she'eino lefichvodo. And in the case of bikur cholim, it applies even to ben gilo, where there's a danger of contagion, etc., etc. But nevertheless, every one of these ribuyim that give you a special, extensive obligation, akol mitzvah achasi. It all comes under one mitzvah. Ve'aftal l'recha kamocha ligmol chesed ima'ah. Ulefi daiti od ki ein roy limnos shum mitzvah mishum ashoras Yisro leMoshe Rabbeinu. All right, this is already a new chapter. Yeah, I don't know why he doesn't press the return button here and indicate that it's a separate category. So just give me a minute. I think I have a pencil here. I know I have one in Beit Midrash to read, but do I have one here? Sure enough, I can't find one. Okay, so we'll try to figure this out, but basically we got up to Lefi Daiti Od.
Okay.
All right then.
Yep.
So let me wish you all a great day, and I hope to see you later on tonight.
Yes. Are you set?
Okay.
Did you find what you
In my
wanted?
humble opinion, you should begin fasting now. So you'll have plenty of room to eat.
Did you find people to help you?
I don't know. They're asking 1,000 shekels, so my wife got cold feet. I don't know.
No, that's ridiculous. You need to find a couple of teenagers.
What Bruce says too, it's not possible that the BeHaG counts as the mitzvah without, as the rice without being in the 613.
What do you mean? How would you count it if it's not part of 613?
I think that's what Bruce says to you before. I think that's
Right, that it's a subcategory. He says,
Right. No, that the Ramban is okay with. He's fine with subcategories, but to count it as separate numbers in the Taryag, when it's really a subcategory, that the Ramban...
That's what I was wondering. Might the BeHaG have counted it as a mitzvah d'oraita? But it's number 3A. There's A, B, C, D. and therefore we get
Correct,
you.
but again, if you're gonna do that, then the numbers are gonna just explode because,
No, it's just three. It's a subset of the. You have your.
okay, but then the BeHaG says I have 613. That's what he says. If you're gonna start counting subcategories in every mitzvah, you're gonna multiply it by who knows what.
No, I'm suggesting that he not count the subcategory. It's just 3, A, B, C, D.
No, but again, the BeHaG has a list. He gives you a list. He doesn't give you the explanation why this list is justified. But in the list, let's imagine he gets up to number 599. So he needs I'm sorry. He gets up to the number
So each one of these four are on the
609,
list.
like 609. So after he gets to 609, he jumps from 609 to 613 by adding these 4 aspects of chesed, of being Malbush Harumim and being a Kover Mason.
No, but I guess my question is why he doesn't make it a subcategory and not count
don't
it
know
as a
why.
separate number.
We don't
it's
know
part of the-
why. That's what I'm telling you. The Ramban at this point, after defending the BeHaG religiously and loyally for page after page after page, finally he lifts up his hands.
Right.
And he says, I can't explain and justify the BeHaG.
Uh-huh.
Right, let
Okay.
me go.